Hey there, it's Olivia Savannah here from Olivia's Catastrophe, and today it's the most wonderful time of the year because booktubers are telling you the best books that they read in 2025. I read over 150 books this year, some really brilliant books, and I'm here to give you a top 15. As always, I have absolutely cheated, and you'll find out why and how I've cheated as we go along with this video. And if you stick around to the very end, I do have my top 3 favorites that I think are the best of the best that I read. So 3 books are my top 3 of the year, and then I'm going to start with all the others before we get into that. There'll be content warnings for all of these books in the description box down below in case that's something you need. Or without further ado, let me tell you about some of the best books that I read this year. So the first one I want to tell you about is For Such a Time as This by Shani Akilah, and this is a short story collection that is focused on the Black British experience, and that's pretty much it, and I absolutely love this connection. You're following a group of friends who are all interconnected and overlapping as they tell you about their life. Some of these short stories are focused on love, some of them are focused on grief, some of them are featuring characters who have endometriosis or who are tired of the Black exhaustion that they feel within the work culture, and each and every single one of these short stories was something that I was connecting to personally and relating to, and I really loved how it talked about Black culture as something that's non-monolithic. You see like Black Jamaicans, you see Black Trinidadians, you see like different facets of the Black experience. There's male characters and female characters as well, queer characters and straight characters, and I just absolutely loved this short story collection. However, there is a personal reason why I also adored this one. I was grieving at the time of reading this, and there's one particular short story where a Black woman goes back to Jamaica to spend some last moments with her grandfather who is dying, and it was set in the same like area that my own grandmother was from, and it just hit the nail on the head of the grieving experience. And that's the only short story in the collection that has a part 1 and a part 2 of when you're with someone who you know is dying and then after they've passed away and you're grieving, and that just hit me in the feels. And I don't really cry when I'm reading unless I'm already vulnerable in some way, as in reading a book about grief while grieving, and therefore I just shattered when I read this collection, and so it became one of my favorite books that I've read this year. The next one is very different, and this is Children of Fallen Gods by Carissa Broadbent. Now if you know me, I'm not actually that much a reader of the romantasy genre, but this sequel to Daughter of No Worlds by Carissa Broadbent is definitely one of the best sequels that I've read all year. It was absolutely fantastic. So this is set in this fictional fantasy world where a slave, a former slave, is freed, and she goes to train her magic under this magician who is a bit of a recluse. He doesn't want to teach anybody, he doesn't want anything to do with the rest of the world, but he gets assigned to her, and they form a like reluctant friendship, and as they do so, she is chosen for a certain task, and he really does not want her to do that task for a particular reason. And that's kind of what I can tell you about the plot. It is a fantasy romantasy, I would say, so a lot of the focus is actually on the world building and the plot. That's what takes the forefront, and the romance is a big part of the story, but it's what actually is not the main element of the story, and that's exactly how I like my romantasy, when you're still getting a lot of fantasy and then you're getting a good dose of romance too. And in this second book, there's not that much I can tell you, but I can say that there is a big war at play. I felt like this was a very realistic depiction of war in a romantasy book, because often I feel like the war is kind of off to the side and you don't go into the nitty-gritty of it, but this showed war has consequences, and also that war is not one person fighting another person. There's a lot more political alliances, you know, material support, maybe there are more than 2 sides fighting, and I really liked seeing that. I also think you get to see these characters spend time apart and together, and the way that that contributes to the romance that they have was so endearing and so cute. I really loved Max all the more in this book. But the main reason why this book is on my best books list is something I cannot tell you about. All I can say is that unlike the first book, you get 2 timelines, and what the author does with those 2 timelines had me reeling, and I absolutely loved how masterfully crafted this book was. Now, not to be too confusing, but the next best book I have to tell you about is called Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This is a sci-fi novel and I absolutely loved it. I went and I told everybody I loved it. My brother-in-law immediately read it and loved it. It's such a good sci-fi book and it has been around for a long time, but I am catching up. So Children of Time is set in the world where Earth has become destitute and terrible and we can no longer live there, so humans get sent off in these ark ships to go and find different planets or different places to populate. At the same time, a particular scientist has a project to, boost evolution in a creature of animals so that they can be able to make their own line of support, and she plans to do this with monkeys. However, something goes wrong in her plan. This has effects and consequences for her, but it also means that actually the boosting evolution virus that she sent out gets landed with some spiders, and that is all I can tell you. But let me tell you, this person here who has severe arachnophobia did not think I could read a sci-fi book with spiders as main characters and feel so much sympathy and so much passion for spider characters, and yet I did. These alien spiders had my heart. You're following two different perspectives. You've got the alien spiders and then you've got the humans, and it is a suspenseful read. There's science injected into this sci-fi, so there are scientific terms, there is science jargon, but at the same time it was easy enough for someone like me to understand and follow whatever was happening. And even though this is a plot focused book where the plot is suspenseful and racking up and steps are being taken to reach an end goal, which the way it all exploded, I was at the edge of my seat for those last few chapters and pages, it still managed to balance it very well with characterization, and it does something quite unique in the characterization in terms of the evolution being escalated over a long period of time, but I was still rooting for each and every single one of these characters that I met, and I wanted them all to be okay. I didn't want to pick sides. I wanted everything to work out at the end, and so this managed to be not only a really interesting concept for a sci-fi novel, but a concept that was well executed with a really suspenseful plot and fantastic characterization. What more could you possibly want in your book? For the best middle grade novel that I read this year, I actually have a sequel, and that is Skandar and the Phantom Rider by A.F. Steadman. This is the sequel to Skandar and the Unicorn Thief, so I'll tell you about that book. So it's set in a world where unicorn riders exist. They are the protectors of the realm, and in order to become a unicorn rider, all children get sent to the hatch and they get to touch an egg, and if it, emerges with a unicorn, that means you are chosen. You go to this boarding school where you learn to train your unicorns, and there is an evil villain at play. Now, that is the first book in the series, and this is the sequel, and I was very impressed with the first book because it had its own arc, it did the world building really well, you establish a found family group of friends, and it deals with some very mature themes that middle grade audiences can understand. So fun, magical, enjoyable, brilliant, but could almost read like a standalone. So I was wondering what could happen next, and the author took everything that I loved from the first book and put it into the second book and added to it, and I loved that. She extended on the world building so it became even more breathtaking, even more magical, and even more immersive. While we get to know the friends very well in the first book, there's a lot of pressures that is reliant on all of these characters, and they really come to a boil and a head in the second book, especially jealousy that can happen between friends when one of them feels like the main character and everybody else feels like the supporting cast. And I loved how this author made me realize that none of these characters are supporting characters. They're all main characters to their own story and their own plot, and while we are focusing on Skandar as readers, you can see in the background these other stories unfolding, and yet it doesn't overtake the narrative that we are following. And I just really appreciated that she took the time to give that kind of development, to show those complicated relationships and how underneath it all they still absolutely love each other. For a middle grade novel, I often expect to know where the plot is going to go. I'm an adult reader reading middle grade, and so I can see the clues and where we're building towards. Yeah, I didn't see it coming. I thought I had this book all planned out, but no. This middle grade book took me by surprise by the end of it, and I loved that because it meant I as an adult was also hooked. So if you have a child in your life, or you just are an adult as well who likes middle grade reading, I highly recommend this one. It's the best middle grade book I read this year. I have two favourite novellas, so I'm going to talk about them both now. One of my favourite novellas that I read this year was Ring Shout by Djeli. I have talked about this one a lot. I read it right after watching Sinners and it was fantastic to read in that moment. This one is like a fantasy horror novella where we're following a group of people, black people, and they are the only ones who can see that the KKK are actually monsters. They are literal monsters, some of them. So they are battling these KKK monsters, but something big is brewing, something big is coming, and it's about whether they can prepare for this big monster that they are going to face. Now, while that sounds very fantasy, very straightforward in terms of plot, there's actually so much going on here thematically. You've got like Gullah culture, and you've got history, and you've got the ring shouts, which is a form of singing and chanting. You've got a different magical plane as well that they can go into, and yet at the same time we are focused on these characters, this group of friends who are there for each other, who support each other, who have each other's back in these battles. And our main character, who's going through a character arc where she has to face some of the hauntings that she has from her past in order to be able to fight this upcoming monster. There is so much happening in this novella, and even though there is so much happening, I thought it was absolutely perfection. I didn't need it to be any longer, I didn't need it to be any shorter. Every word counted, the world was built up and established, and all of the magical systems and how everything worked, I understood it. I understood it without it having to be over-explained. And so this book just made me feel like the culture was captured, you know? My attention, my investment was absolutely captured. Not every character makes it out of this book, and I was feeling the emotional impact whenever we lost someone. I didn't want any of them to be gone, I wanted them all to be okay, but you know, authors gotta kill their darlings sometimes. And then the other novella that I read that I absolutely loved this year was called When Among Crows by Veronica Roth. This is an urban fantasy novella which is based and steeped in Polish mythology. You're following Demeter, who is a man who is going to find this magical plant that grows once a year or something like that. It's very rare, and he has to sacrifice something to get this plant, and it can grant one wish. He's got something in mind for this wish, and you're with him as he's on that journey to achieve that. I loved this from beginning until end. The first page that I read, I knew I was going to love it because Veronica Roth hits you with such lush, such beautiful writing that you can't help but immediately sink into the story. The magic system and the world is just so well put together. You can tell that it's based off a mythology that pre-exists, and this mythology was entirely new to me, and yet I fell into it like it was a second skin. I was completely there. I love urban fantasy for how we get to have the familiarity of the real world while we slowly gradually learn about this whole other world that exists beneath it. Demeter is a character you immediately become interested in and enticed by. He's so mysterious and we don't exactly know what his aims are, but as you see him deal with this magical world that he is adjacent to but not entirely part of, and how expertly he handles it, you can't help but root for him. And the ending just comes together masterfully in terms of its themes, its concepts, but also its storytelling. And my heart was Demeter's. I was feeling for him and wanting all the best for him, so when everything happened at the end, my heart, that's all I can really say. So I just really liked how it was building and building, and I was just following this story and along with this journey, and then I realized what it was all going to come to in terms of the message that Veronica Roth wanted to give us, and you can't misconstrue it, you can't mistake it, and it's such a powerful, important message as well. So When Among Crows did this spectacularly well. Switch to young adult. There are two top young adult books that I read last year, and I'm going to tell you about them now. So one of them is a book that just made me incredibly, completely and wholeheartedly happy, and that is When You Get the Chance by Emma Lord. I actually didn't think that this was going to be on my best books of the year, but when I looked at all the books that I read this year, it absolutely deserved a place. This is a young adult novel that's a retelling of Mamma Mia. How fantastic does that sound? How fantastic. I love Mamma Mia, I love ABBA, I love musicals, and so this book was a dream for me. You're following a young teenage girl who lives with her single dad. She doesn't know who her mother is, but she discovers her dad's diary and finds out that he was spending time with 3 women at the same time, and so she does her research with her best friend, and she's going to meet each of these 3 women while she tries to figure out which one of them is her mum. But at the same time, she's also wanting to go for this internship so that she can further her acting career, because she's very into acting. But her nemesis from school is also running for this internship, and those are the 2 storylines that we are following. This is a book that balances absolutely everything that it's handling very well. The internship storyline is where we get our romance, and it's an enemies to lovers romance. I loved it. I loved Oliver as a character, as a love interest. He was just like the cutest little cinnamon bun, and I adored them together. I think they worked so well together, especially as they kind of begrudgingly have a moment where they establish a truce and they really root themselves in friendship before you get that enemies to lovers switch over. I really loved that. The whole storyline about trying to find her mother, it was emotional. It was emotional because what we've got here is a young daughter with a single dad, and I don't kind of see that relationship done very much in young adult fiction. And I loved her relationship with her dad, how her dad was so different from her. Her dad is like a nerd, a gamer, into sci-fi stuff, and then she's all about musicals, which he couldn't care less about. But you see them both show interest in each other's interests so that they can bond and have that family, you know, connection. And she spends a lot of time thinking about how what she's doing is going behind her dad's back, and the emotions that come with that. And it felt very realistic. And especially as this plot, you know, it has to blow up at some point, everything goes wrong. And I felt like there were very realistic consequences to her actions and very good conversations around everything that needed discussing. The communication, once the plot got going, was excellent. And so I just was impressed by how this could be a young adult novel of about 300 pages, and yet it could juggle these 3 strands very well and give me a romance that can make me feel very soft and swoon and root and champion it, while also showing me a family dynamic that was really, you know, intense and emotional and vulnerable. And yet it's also injected with so many musical references and so much joy and happiness and, you know, love for the theatre lifestyle. And I adored it. I adored how all of those things came together. The other young adult book that really stole my heart this year was Confessions of an Alleged Good Girl by Joya Goffney. Now this is a young adult book following a preacher man's daughter. She has grown up within the church and she's grown up immersed in purity culture. However, even though the church champions purity culture, she's been trying to have sex with her boyfriend for a very long time, and it hasn't been working. It's just painful. She can't do it. And this is a book as she gradually discovers that she has vaginismus and what she wants to do to win back her boyfriend, who eventually breaks up with her because they can't sleep together. Now, I didn't know about vaginismus at all before I read this book, and I love when I read young adult books that can teach me about something that I didn't know before. Not only was it incredibly educational in terms of telling us about vaginismus in a way that works with the plot, but it's also about a young woman who has grown up steeped in church culture and in the church, learning a lot of toxicity around purity culture, which I just think is so important and so relevant. And yet, while it's still doing all of that unlearning and unmaking, it's still showing us faith in different forms. It's showing us queer Christians. It's showing us Christians who still choose to wait, but are doing it in a way that's not toxic and doing it for their own reasons. It's showing us Christians who can have fun. It's showing faith and how faith can be one thing, but the church and people can be a very different thing. And I liked how well this managed to explore all of the facets of that, because that's a big topic to unpick and to tackle in a book, and yet it does it in a way that was very easy to understand, was clear and direct, and yet it was part and parcel of a story. And the narrative doesn't make me feel like I was learning, doesn't actually make me feel like I was tackling some really big themes. I was just here for one woman, or I should say one teenage girl learning that she wanted to change something about her, that she had this condition, but also in order to try and win back her boyfriend, she learns that maybe she wants something different for herself. She grows a lot in terms of confidence as she unlearns some of these rules that have been applied and forced on her. And there are some different subplots. There's a subplot with the dysfunctional elements of the family. There's a lot about friendship in this, and then her coming into her own and discovering what love truly looks like and truly means with a romance of her own. I loved the love interest that she ends up with. I loved how they fit together. I loved how much they have fun together, and it really shows like love is fun. That's what it should be. And so yeah, I really liked everything that this book did. It also flipped some stereotypes on its head, and at the end it all came together. My heart was all big and warm and fuzzy and smooshed, and I'd learned and I'd experienced, and it was a brilliant book. Oh, I actually forgot there was one more novella that I absolutely loved, and I just keep banging on about this novella but I can't help it. Thornhedge by T. Kingfisher. It got me through a hard time last year. It's very short, and it's a reversed retelling of Sleeping Beauty, where what if the fairy that did the curse is good, and what if Sleeping Beauty may not be good. It's a fantasy novella, so you've got Toadling as our main character, who is, she's not quite green teeth, but she's not quite not, and she can transform into a toad. You've got a knight who is very chivalrous and very polite, and painfully polite sometimes. And yeah, I don't know if I can tell you much more because Sleeping Beauty is a story that speaks for itself, but it's really fun. It's really creative. It manages to establish that there's a magic system and a world that we won't get to see. We are here for this tower and these two characters who are absolutely adorable together. And I shipped them. I liked their story. I read it in almost one sitting, and I had a fantastic time, and it became one of the best books I read this year. Keep recommending it to everyone as a starting place for T. Kingfisher's works. So now we are going to talk about Christmas books. Usually my Christmas books don't make it onto my best books of the year list because they're just not the best books that I've read in the year. There's just so much other stuff. But this year I really got into my festive reads, and I really just had such a fantastic time, and there were two brilliant ones that I've read. We've come to the point where I've started cheating. So I'm going to talk about these two best Christmas books as if they are, you know, one entry into my best books of the year. So the first one I want to tell you about is another book that just made me incredibly happy, and that's Good Spirits by B.K. Borison. Good Spirits is about a ghost of Christmas past called Nolan. He is Irish, and he is there to show Harriet the errors of her ways. But as he gets to know Harriet, he realizes that A, his magic is doing something weird, and B, Harriet is genuinely nice. So why is she, you know, signed up to this program where she needs to be haunted by the ghosts of Christmas to figure out how she did wrong and how she could do better? Now, let me tell you, this book was fun from the beginning. It's almost as if Christmas came together and threw up all over this book. It's just Christmas personified, and that's what I want in my festive reads. I just want Christmas all over, all up in that, and that's what this book gave me. I also really just liked Nolan and Harriet as a couple. The first chapter is when Nolan appears. The whole book they are together, and I just liked seeing them together. I enjoyed their dynamic. I enjoyed them challenging each other and pushing each other to do more and to ask questions while being wrapped up in this plot of what is going wrong with the magic and why is the system failing for some reason or form. We get to understand how this ghost haunting situation works, but we also don't go too deep in it. It's really just a happy Christmas romance. And if I could describe this book, I would say it's the cozy genre matched with the romance genre. And you may think the romance genre is already quite cozy, but just think even lower stakes than you usually get in a romance, and that's what you get. Things are cheesy by the end of it, just so cheesy. I love a cheesy Christmas romance, and that's what this gave me. I don't actually think I have that much to say. It's more so about Nolan as a character, Harriet as a character, them together around Christmas time. And then the other Christmas book I read that I really loved was Make You Mine This Christmas by Lizzie Huxley-Jones. Now this plot is very straightforward. She is a female main character, and she ends up fake dating her friend, and she is going back with him for Christmas because he needs someone and she needs somewhere to go for Christmas, and he needs someone to like fend off some of his family and his ex, who people think he's not over. They go home for Christmas, and turns out, wow, as a bisexual main character, she started to fall for his sister for real, and that is obviously going to be a problem. Now, I absolutely love this. It's just so joyful, and it's also so British. I don't read that many, you know, British set Christmas books. For some reason, a lot of them are American, and just being in, you know, York and then outside of London for the Christmas was fantastic. But also it's just in the references, in the way the characters act, in the way that they talk. It's just Britishness personified in a book, and I loved that. It made me so very happy. We've also got some brilliant representation. We've got a plus size bisexual main character, we've got a disabled love interest, and there's some more representation that the author adds in the author's note at the end, so I'll just leave that for you to discover as you read and go along. I love that this book is exploding in queerness. I love that it puts the comedy in rom-com. There are some very funny situational humor moments, but also our main character is just genuinely funny and cracks a lot of jokes that had me smiling or giggling and laughing while reading this book. When I was talking to Chelsea from Chelsea Jow about this book, she mentioned that it's the one time that she's read fake dating where the characters who are fake dating are not the endgame couple, and I agree. I loved that. It puts a bit of a refreshing spin on the fake dating trope, and yet you also get to see, you know, it is a romance, and romance is one of the main things about this book, but also there's a distinct focus on the friendship. These two characters who are fake dating are friends, they are new friends, and they are learning to like be there for each other and support each other. And I think at Christmas it can be so focused on family or on romance that sometimes, you know, the friendship element of Christmas gets forgotten, and I feel so much love from my friends at Christmas, so I loved getting to see the friendship in this. There's a lot of secondary characters as well. They are all fantastic and sublime, and I just had so much fun reading Make You Mine this Christmas. It's by a non-binary trans author as well, so if you want to diversify your Christmas reading, this is a very good one to do that with. Before we get to my top 3 favourites, we've now moved on to the steamy portion of my best books of the year. So one of the best books that I've read this year is Wicked Beauty by Katee Robert. This is it's either the third, is it the fourth? It's one of the books in the Dark Olympus series by Katee Robert. At the beginning of 2025, I had not started this series. By the end of 2025, I'm 4 books deep. If you know me, I'm not really a series reader, so this is kind of a big deal. And the best one that I read was Wicked Beauty. This one in particular, as these are Greek mythology retellings, is a retelling of Helen's story, Helen of Troy. But there is a bit of a twist. It's also a retelling of Achilles and Patroclus' story. So in this installment, the god Ares is dead, the god of war, and in order for them to find a replacement god of war, they are running trials. 3 trials, and whoever wins becomes the new Ares. However, what Helen did not know herself is that whoever wins this trial will also win her hand. Her brother has set it up that way. But she does not want to be married to a stranger. She wants to choose her fate for herself. So what she does is she enters into the games as a contestant herself, and it's not against the rules. Achilles and Patroclus are also people who have entered into this competition. Achilles in particular is very much vying for being the new Ares, and Patroclus enters to support him, as he always does, because he's Patroclus. And Achilles and Patroclus are in an open relationship where they are, you know, partners to each other, but they do have other partners in bed. And then there's Helen. And you can imagine where this goes romantically. Now, Katee Roberts is one of my favourite dark romance writers, mostly because her steaminess is all consensual all the way through, but also the way that she writes her steamy scenes is just so good. They feel romantic, they feel super sexy, and they feel so hot, and yet there's also clear boundaries always established. And what I particularly liked in this Dark Olympus books over all the others is how well it balances all of the elements of the plot and storytelling. Now, I think you can see, I keep mentioning this when I talk about these books, but I just love when things are done well. And this is another case of something being done well, because we've got so many multiple threads to this storyline. We've got a romance between 3 people who are really in a tough situation where they are all competing against each other, and also where 2 of them are in an established relationship of some form, even though it's open, and adding a whole other partner to that relationship is something that they have to discuss, is something that they have to like experience and try, and it might not work out, it might fail, and how does Helen feel about all of this? So there's a whole romantic storyline that's quite complex in terms of its dynamics happening, while we also have these really suspenseful trials. And I really loved how this one in the series had good good plot elements to it. Like the trials were difficult, the trials were suspenseful. I didn't actually know how the trials was going to work out or who was going to win by the end of the book, and so I had a plot that I was actually interested in and I was intrigued by, and she managed to slip in steamy scenes amongst that all. And then as well, with this whole series, you've got the individual plots, but you've also got an overarching plot that is coming together. And in this book, it really did, you know, throw some new elements to this overarching plot in. And a lot of that has to do with the political intrigue of how Dark Olympus is run. And so I was impressed by how it managed to further the overarching plot, give us its own individual plot, and show us this really interesting, you know, character dynamic and relationship forming. Can you guess who wrote the other best steamy book I read this year? Sarah Simone. I love Sarah Simone's books. I'm currently on the journey of reading all of her books, and I'm going to be cheating again and mentioning 2 Sierra Simone books that became like my favourite Sierra Simone book I read, and both of them are actually co-written. So the first one is called Hot Cop by Sierra Simone. Don't you love that cover? And Hot Cop is about this young woman who decides that she doesn't want to be in a relationship. She wants to be single forever. However, there is one thing that she wants, and that is a child. She does want to have a child. And she has an encounter where she meets this cop who is really hot. He's like a bachelor. He's happy to be bachelor. He wants to be single for a very long time and just keep like sleeping his way and having a great time. And yet she comes to him with a proposition. We can have as much sex as we want to have, as you want to have, until I get pregnant, and then we cut things off, because she just wants to become pregnant and he just wants to sleep with her. So this could be a deal that could work for both of them. And I had so much fun reading this book. You can imagine that it is full to the brim of steaminess. It's just steaminess here, there, everywhere, any location, any time. You know, she's trying to become pregnant and she's trying to do it very quickly. So there's a lot about that. There's a lot of limitations to what they can do in the bedroom. There's a lot of emotional stuff that she goes through in terms of her journey and her experiences. And it's very interesting seeing people who do not want to be a couple going through this, because there's boundaries, you know, like how much will he be involved in the future, how much can he help her while she's planning for things ahead of time, and all of that dynamic, amongst all of that, they form a romance. And I just loved seeing them fall for each other and fall in love with each other without really noticing, because they're so focused on this other joint goal that they have. And I also love, you know, it's always nice when it's like he falls first and he falls first and he falls deep and she is very unsure about everything. So I just really like their dynamic. I like them together. I liked every single steamy scene that I read, and I really believed in this romance. And I think there's also a lot of growing that they do individually but also together. And that is always what, you know, cements a romance to me as something that I can support, when I see that they have to grow and change and mature in individual ways. She has to learn to open up and trust, which I think is a very hard thing to do. And I thought it was a very realistic depiction of learning to open up and trust on her end. And he had to learn that maybe the life that he wanted for himself is not actually the life that he wants for himself anymore, and that's okay to change. But also it means you have to change all the expectations of people around you, and that can also be a very big deal when you've got friends and family who expect you to be a certain way, and you have to come to them like, no, I want you to meet me again and meet me here now. And I think that was all established very well. Well, at the base of this, you know, it is just a steamy romance book, so that was really good. And then the other one is actually A Holly Jolly Ever After. This is co-written between Julie Murphy and Sierra Simone, and I'm cheating again because it's technically also a Christmas book. It's the second book in the Christmas Launch series, which I finished in 2025, but this one in the middle was my favorite one. It's following Whitty Baker. She has grown up in faith-based media, so that is like very Christian, lots of purity culture, and she has been dropped by them because she has divorced her husband, and that's a big no-no within the faith-based media. So she's been absolutely dropped by them, but she needs some money, and she gets a job acting in a very steamy and raunchy Christmas film, which is a complete turnaround from everything that she's ever done before. However, she needs to fake feelings on camera that she's never actually experienced in the bedroom. And so her love interest within the film, who is an ex-pop star who has had a sex tape leaked, he says, how about I help you learn how to feel those emotions so we can better fake it on camera and make a very good film. And that is where the romance is going. It's set in Christmas Notch, which is this like very festive Christmas town where they are doing the filming. And this book has part 1 and part 2, and part 1 and part 2 are very different from each other. However, I loved both of them. The first, I've actually now had lots of time to think about this book, and what I would describe part 1 and part 2 is, part 1 is where Winnie Baker learns to love herself. She is breaking out of a lot of the mindsets around purity culture, and she's just experiencing a new way of believing and living life. You can see that this topic is something that very much interests me as a Christian myself. I'm all about like dismantling a lot of the toxicity around faith and belief, and so personally to me this was a very intriguing, you know, storyline to follow. I know that Simone is a believer and a Christian, and I just love how she marries steaminess and, you know, very sexy stories with faith, and yet still tackles some really hard topics around faith too. And I loved how it was done and how we saw our female main character fall in love with herself. And then the second part of this story is where they fall in love together in a very different way than they experience. I love a reverse romance, and they do the exact thing where they have a lot of steamy times and they sleep together a lot, and then they slowly learn to fall for each other for real. But that comes with consequences, because Callum, who is our Jewish love interest, has also, you know, always believed that he was just going to be a bachelor forever, and then he starts to realize that maybe he wants something different, but then that's going to come with him changing a lot of stuff about himself. And I do think there's this like misconception that if you're in a relationship, you know, you shouldn't have to change, you should just fall together and everything's going to work together. But that's not necessarily the case. There does need to be like compromise and building together to form the life that you both want. And that's what you so clearly see in this book. Two people who come from very opposite sides of the coin gradually start to fall for each other, but learn that if they are going to work out, things need to change. And I loved seeing how they both changed for things to work. And I really liked how this book showed that not everything is going to be a happy ending. It is a romance story. You do get predominantly, mainly a happy ending, but it's not like everything works out. And I thought that was very realistic, you know? Because not everything will work out in life, and there are some avenues where it's just going to be sadness, or you just have to cut your losses, and I liked how this book showed that as well. I think I've summarized this book very well, hopefully so, because now we get to the point where I get to talk about my top 3 reads of the year, and I'm going to do them in order because I do have a top read of the year. So in third place I have Manorism by Yomi Sode. This is a poetry collection. It is the best poetry collection by far that I read this year. And it's a poetry collection that is basically about black trauma. It's split into 2 parts. So in part 1 you get a collection of poems, various poems, they're all individual and different, but they do tackle, you know, experiences of like racism, black culture, the black experience. And some of these poems are based on actual happenings, actual police encounters, actual stories. And so some of them I knew, but some of them I had to research, and I learned about these atrocious things that have been happening. And so I really appreciated that I learned through reading this poetry collection. But more than that, I think each poem itself was just so easy to understand. This is absolutely a poetry collection that can be read by a beginner, but they were injected with so much emotion and so much, like, it was real. It felt so real. Not only are they based on real experiences, but you could just feel the emotion. You can feel the tug that Yomi wants to bring us to by reading these poems. The words are so carefully and precisely chosen. The way that the sentences, the lines are fragmented or put together or constructed so that we are focusing on this word, this emotion here, this feeling. And I just thought it was really incredibly well done in terms of poetry style and linguistic devices. Yomi Sode knew what they were doing when they were writing this collection. As well as that, we've got part 2, and part 2 is a collection of like conjoined poems. They all flow into each other and they create one big story about a man who is being there for his cousin who is grieving the loss of their parent, who is also someone that they knew as well. What we see in this section of the poetry collection is black male grief, but also grief within black culture. This is not a situation that feels impossible, and I do think it is autobiographical in terms of this is how black people sometimes grieve, this is how some black people are, and there's a lot here of tackling masculinity, especially because grief is like an emotion that often people are told to repress or people are told to hide, and it's, you know, contradictory to some of the toxic masculinity that we see, because men will be crying and emotional and reaching out to people for help, and a lot of it is unpacking the failings of our main persona in this poem, which are due to a lot of masculinity but also a lot of fear and anxiety and withholding themselves from emotion. And it just felt so raw and so true and so regretful that it took my breath away while I was reading it. I was like, this is real, you know, this is truth. And that's what I felt while I was reading this poetry collection. Absolutely phenomenal. Would read any other poetry collection Yomi Sode decides to bless us with. The second best book I read this year is a short story collection. It's a sci-fi short story collection called Exhalation by Ted Chiang. Now these are short stories that all have to do with a slightly different sci-fi futuristic concept. Some of them have to do with whether the future really is our choice or whether the future is predetermined. Some of them have to do with alternate universes, where there are different versions of ourselves that split every time we make a decision. You know, language, and whether we are the only ones who communicate by language or whether other animals have a language that they are communicating with but it's going over our head because we can't understand it. There's a futuristic one where the oxygen is running out. So there's just so much variation in terms of these stories, and yet each one has a familiar pattern where there's a very interesting scientific concept that is rooted in the now, as if it could be possible now, but then we see it escalated into the future and what that could look like. So it feels plausible, it feels possible, it feels like we are almost there, and yet we are seeing something that is still very futuristic. We are seeing the consequences of actions, whether that's to do with us being ignorant of language or us making choices and decisions that alter the future, or climate change. And I was just impressed by how each of these shows something about humanity and us at our core, whether that's something good or something bad. And yet, while these books are very futuristic and are set in the future, each one of them is injected with a sense of hopefulness. Not that they end happy all the time, or not that, you know, it's always bleak and sad at the end, but there's something hopeful within the story. We're seeing the future, but it's not apocalyptic, and I really liked that. I liked that there was a sense of, okay, maybe a sad thing is happening, or maybe that's not a great future, or maybe this is a great future, but there is still hope, and that is carried through each and every single one of these short stories in a very different way in each story. But I thought it was just incredibly clever for Ted Chiang to leave us with those lingering feelings of hope. If I had to describe this short story collection, I would describe it as Black Mirror episodes within short stories, but then a bit less bleak than Black Mirror, but with just as good concepts. I was fascinated as I read each of these short stories. I didn't actually read them in the order that they are in the collection. I just jumped around based on what I was in the mood to read, and every single one of them 5 stars. Every single one. And that doesn't always happen with a short story collection, so that's how you know it's very, very good. So that leads me to the very best book that I read in 2025. When I was constructing this list, there was actually no question about it. The best book I read this year was Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. Giovanni's Room is a well-known modern classic. You're following a man who goes to Paris because he's escaping the life that he's left behind him in the US, and he is clearly a gay man, but he has a lot of internalized homophobia, and there is a lot of external homophobia around him as well. And so he is with a woman who's not around at the moment, and he meets Giovanni, and it's about what happens when he meets Giovanni in Paris. This book is, how could I describe this book? It's so incredibly clever. It's well written, it's masterful. The writing itself is lyrical and beautiful. It transports you to Paris, and yet even though the writing is gorgeous and beautiful and luscious, you are in the mind of the most self-absorbed, horrible person. And I, as a reader, don't get along with unlikable characters. I think of all the books that I mentioned, all of these characters are likable. It's very hard for me to enjoy a book when I do not like our main character. But James Baldwin does something where he is writing the perspective, as a black man, he is writing a perspective of a white, privileged, rich, white person who is just gallivanting across Paris doing whatever he wants, who is internalizing these feelings that he has inside of himself because he dislikes himself so strongly. And yet James Baldwin shows us that there are reasons why he thinks this way, why he feels this way, and that his self-disgust is erupting as hate towards others and doing hurtful things towards others. And in some ways you feel like, oh my gosh, I can't blame him. But then in some ways you're like, oh my goodness, if he could just be kinder, he can change his ways. It's his choice to be mired in these thoughts and feelings. So you feel a sense of hopelessness and helplessness in him, whereas you also fully, you know, uphold him to the consequences of his actions and his decisions and choices. And having that duality, that dimension to a character, means good writing. Means you have to have thoughts so clearly and intentionally about every single thing he says and every single thing he does. And there's so much pain that you feel at the end of reading this novel, not necessarily because it ends badly or sadly, but because you can see how it could have ended if things had been different, if choices had been made differently. And it's painful to read this book, but I think it's a really interesting depiction of a character you don't like, and things happening that you disagree with, and everything kind of going as wrong as it possibly can. But by you seeing a horrible character and a horrible story, you understand how it could have been better, and you want it to have been better, and therefore you learn something about what you want to do in life to not be like that. And that is a cautionary tale. That is a cautionary tale, very cleverly constructed and very well done. I don't think there's much I can say about this book without, you know, because I want you to go and experience it. But if you read any classic, please read this one, because it is intentional. But I will say to all of, you know, the queer community, there is a lot of internalized homophobia and it is rife. So protect yourself, know your content warnings, know if you want to go into a book like this. The ending of this book is perfect. That final scene, those final lines, perfection. Perfection incarnate. And on that final note, I will leave you here, because I have been raving and giving you so much love on my best books of 2025 for a long time now. And I really hope you pick up one of these books. They are all spectacular, brilliant. I wouldn't change a single thing or a single word. And I cannot wait for the reading that I'm going to do in 2026. I can only hope that it brings me as many 5-star favorites as this year has done. Please let me know in the comment section down below what was your favorite book that you read in the year of 2025. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, hit the subscribe button if you want to see more, and don't forget to hit that notification bell to be updated every time I have a new video. And you know what they say, onwards and upwards. Excelsior!